They interview him and they say to the boy, the now man who drinks like his dad, he goes, "Why do you drink?" And he says, "Well, you see my father, how could I not drink?" And then they go to the other boy or now man and say, "Well, why don't you drink?" And he goes, "Well, look at my father, how could I drink?" Right? Like, we do have an impact on our children, and it's important to understand that. But there's so much of it we're not in control of. They can get on Snapchat and basically have anything they want delivered to them. Anything.
Right.
If you're a parent and you think that's not true, it's 100% true. You can eat just as easily get fentanyl pills or MDMA or marijuana as you can get a chicken sandwich.
Yeah, and that's like a dire warning, but it's not an over-exaggeration.
Sometimes they rebel against it, but many times they just adopt, and this is how we're gonna, and if taste is shaped that way, or partially shaped that way, behaviors would be too, and we tend to either adopt or rebel against the patterns of our family members, and even if we rebel against them, we're still kind of being controlled by them because we're operating in the opposite way of something that's already there.
Welcome to the Why Intervention Podcast. I am your host, Christopher Doyle, today joined by Ryan Soave. Ryan is a renowned expert in addiction treatment and trauma recovery with decades of extensive clinical experience. He's a person in long-term recovery. He's on the front lines helping people with addictions and their families every day. He's a husband. He's a father. All-around great guy. Ryan, so happy to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to chat.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I needed that today. It's been a morning.
Yes, sometimes we do have mornings. So, one of the things that, of course, you had a podcast with Andrew Huberman that was just so influential, and I think is probably required listening for anyone who really wants to understand addiction better, right? And the solutions that are available. And so I wanted to just have a conversation today where specifically kind of that is steered towards helping families understand what's going on in the minds of their addicted loved ones more than just your average kind of, here's what you can Google, right? Because behind closed doors, kind of bringing the clinical staffer kind of conversations to the fore, if you will, on how we understand addiction. We talk about it and what we're dealing with and what we're seeing and how some of that might be helpful for families and parents more specifically.
Okay, great.
So one statistic that I bring up somewhat often is a statistic from the National Home Survey on Drug Use and Health. And it says that 94.7% of people, and this is from 2022, the last study I read on this, 94.7% of people with an addiction do not perceive the need for help. And so that lack of perception, when you're in a clinical setting, how often are you seeing your clients coming in just to do some myth busting right off the front of, are they coming in wanting it, ready, having hit bottom, saying they want to be there, they're ready to get help? Or is there a strong degree of ambivalence? Is there a strong degree of resistance? What has been your clinical experience there?
That's it varies greatly. I'll start by saying that, to understand the mind of what's going on in the mind of someone who's addicted or using alcohol or some other behavior is challenging because everybody's mind is different. And people come in for help. And granted, oftentimes when they're seeing me or a facility that I work with, they've seen there's a big problem or somebody in their family has seen a big problem. They're not usually just coming in because they had one bad night or one bad day. And so, one of the really effective tools in therapeutic tools or modalities of therapy to use with people that suffer from addictions is motivational interviewing. And I might get critiqued by people that are really well versed in it, but I think basically when we look at motivational interviewing, it's helping people build the internal motivation to get the help that they need and meet the goals that they want. So the help that they need is not only based on what other people see, it's helping them determine what their goals are in life and is what they're doing going to get them there. And oftentimes when people come into a detox or they're, right off of they've they're in some sort of significant pain or suffering, or there's legal problems or whatever. They might not be, and they still have substances in their system. They're not always looking at that. The substance use kind of narrows the perception of time into like, I need to drink or use next in order to stay right, just to stay balanced. You're leaning on something outside of you to be okay. And I really believe that. I believe that people that become addicted are utilizing the substance or the alcohol almost as again, I might get crucified for this too, but almost as a search for mindfulness. They're ill at ease in some way, and it might be because they don't have the substance anymore. It might be because of other conditions in their life, and they're looking at something to find ease and comfort.
Right.
And, so they are leaning on something. So coming back to your question, when people come in, they don't always have the greatest internal motivation for change. Sometimes people will say they do, and I've seen people come in that say they do, and they say, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And then, a few days later, they start feeling better, and they're like, well, I'm going to do something else.
Right.
And I've seen people that come in that, are really struggling and fighting it, and it's their families bringing them in or the legal system bringing in, and they don't want to be there, and they're not buying into anything. And then these people tend to, not tend to, I've seen these people then build a great motivation for change, be able to identify the goals that they want in life, and start to build lives that don't have a place for substances in them. So it really greatly varies. And so I think a lot of people will come in lacking some of the internal motivation. There's a lot of external motivation, right? The spouse, right, the parents, the judge, the police, the doctor, and, they might just be coming in for that. But, when, I've worked with a lot of detox facilities, and when I work with the staff, I would say, people aren't coming to detox to change. They're coming to feel better. And it's probably not the time to, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but they're not feeling great, as they start to come off of what they come off of, and they need some help. And they've probably experimented trying to come off on their own, and it doesn't work that way. So, we start planting some seeds, and then as their minds start clearing, then we can start working on what is it. And it needs to be different for everybody, because it needs to be individualized. What are the goals that you have in your life? Some people are going to say, I want to be sober forever. Some people aren't. And, just because in that moment they're not committing to a lifelong of sobriety doesn't mean that they should suffer and ultimately die or end up in jail. We want to meet them where they are and meet the goals that they have. I think I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but there's something like, I think 5 million beds available for treatment, for substance use treatment every year in the US. And there's probably 40 million that qualify for some sort of alcohol use disorder or treatment. So by an order of magnitude, there's more people that could use the help that aren't either seeking it or it's not available to them. And some of those people, there's other stats that show most people over time quit drinking and doing drugs on their own. And that's not an argument for getting help now. That usually happens like later in life, and they start getting a little more wisdom and their body starts falling apart or not reacting well to it. So not everybody's coming in with the same level of motivation, and it's really important to meet them. It's a saying that a lot of therapists use, right? Meet them where they are. And what that means is, for me anyway, is we're saying somebody is in this state and we're trying to help them get to this state, whether that's stated or maybe it's just finding, they've got a big goal in life, or they just need to get healthy, or they need to get out of feeling really bad. If you want to take someone from somewhere to here, and they're here, you can't start over here. You've got to start where they are. You can't start where they aren't. And where they are includes the understanding they have, the motivation they have, the willingness they have, the resources they have, a whole bunch of things that we need to look at. And so the clinical teams really that I've worked with, we've got to look at all of it. We've got to look at that's where holistic care comes in. And sometimes we think of that as like just making sure that we're doing mind, body, and spirit. But that also means, what are the resources available to these people? What are the life conditions that they have? What are the family conditions that they have and responsibilities that they need to return to? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of treatment kind of puts it in a box, like you need to go away, you need to stay away, and then you need to go somewhere else and stay there, and you need to live in a sober, which would be great. If someone could go to treatment, stay there for a long time, go to a sober living, that's awesome if they can do that. Some people don't have lives that allow for that. And we need to consider that as well. And we need to look at their history. There's some people that have been trying this over and over again, and we need to figure out what's going to be different for them. And some people, it's their first time, and they really believe, hey, if I just get this out of my system, I'm going to be okay. And we need to meet them where they are too, and really build a relationship with them so that, If it does work, great, but we can also help them witness their failures. And if it doesn't work, then we can get them the help they need to meet the goals that they have.
Right.
Does that answer your question? I kind of thought for a while.
Yeah. I mean, we could, in some ways, we could just, that was like so thorough that we could just now process that, go off on your own families and, navigate this from there. There's a lot of threads there. There was motivational interviewing. There's using the substance as a solution rather than it being kind of like solely the problem, or at least how the perspective is of how we kind of look at it. But also what I'd like to maybe focus on before we dive deeper into some of those things is how you take everything that you just said and then kind of make or provide some guidance for families who are then in the thick of it with their addicted child who's living at home, and how to use some of that while also at the same time making the distinction between what should be done in the therapeutic setting, right? That trying to help, like, what's my responsibility and what's not? What's in my sphere of influence and what isn't? Where I should be focusing my energy versus what I should be focusing on, as far as let's just get them connected to a helpful resource and then let the folks there do that work.
Yeah, I mean, I think this becomes a bit different when we're dealing with a 14-year-old versus a 40-year-old or a 24 or 25-year-old. I mean, you have a different set of responsibilities. If they're a 35-year-old that's living in the home still, you're like, you can't live here anymore, and you need to, you're continuing to cause havoc in the home and hurting yourself, and that's hurting us. I mean, you could say you can't live here anymore. If you got a 14-year-old kid, you can't really do that. You have a responsibility for them. And so you're going to look at that a little bit differently. But in both scenarios, I think it's important for the families to realize that there's you started with the serenity prayer. There's a portion of this they can control. There's a portion of this they can't control. And it's finding, the real crux of that is the wisdom to know the difference. As a parent myself, I mean, when my children are hurting in whatever way they are, or in some sort of pain, I want to rescue them. I want to control the situation. I want to fix it. And, that's not always the best thing for them. It's not always the best thing for me. So I have to understand where those limits go. If my daughter, might be very different if my 6-year-old is screaming because she wants ice cream and she's not going to get it. I don't need to fix that, right? But if she was 15 years old and screaming and yelling and saying she needed marijuana in order to just be okay or to drink, I don't have to provide that, right? So you're going to look at things a little bit differently based on the age of the person, but I think it all still boils down to what are the things I can control, and this is the thing that we're working a lot with the clients that come to us. A lot of what I can control is my reactions. At first, I might not seemingly be able to because I've been in reaction. Like, look at where I'm adding to the acuity of the problem, not to blame yourselves, but to understand, you guys, whatever cis families. I had this professor in grad school. I remember she used to say, someone would say, this family's dysfunctional. And she would like slam her hand on the desk and kind of start shaking. She would go, they're not dysfunctional. That's the way they function.
Yeah.
They're functioning. It might not be in the optimal way. It might not be in the way that's bringing people to the health and healing that they want, but they're functioning. And so each person in that family is part of that functioning, and understanding, what am I bringing that's making it more challenging? What am I bringing that's making it easier? I mean, those are very kind of broad categories to put things in. But I think for the families to be able to learn how to get out of reaction for the things that they don't necessarily need to react to. That's easy to say. It's very hard to do. If it's one of my kids, I need 10 of me reminding me of that. But like an old mentor of mine used to say to me, Ryan, you're not qualified to grade your own paper. I would say that to the families too, like understanding, what are you bringing to it that might be adding stress to the system. And it could just be your own, not dealing with it yourself. Lots of times it's happened more than I can count, where a family, you're dealing with them before their child or adult child goes into treatment, and they're like, they want more than anything for them to, or some sort of recovery. They want more than anything for that to happen. And they're saying, if we just get this happen, then we're going to be okay. And then they send their kid somewhere, or their adult child somewhere, and they start falling apart, and they're calling the center over and over again. Like, are they okay? I need to hear their voice. And it's almost like they're addicted to them, right? That's kind of what codependency gets defined in a lot of ways, but I really see it almost like its own addiction. Like, I need to know that this person's okay, or I need them to be okay in order for me to be okay. And, that doesn't really leave a space that has you tethered to that person. And whether they hear it or not every day, then they know they're tethered. So like, that means if they're trying to do better, they're kind of dragged in that way. Sometimes like the patient is doing extremely well and the family's not,
Right.
because and not because they're doing something wrong, but for a long time, they've been functioning around in this case, the addiction. And then now that's out. And now so where the orientation go, and where does that energy go? And when it works well, that energy goes to them really doing their own self-exploration, understanding themselves, allowing themselves to be challenged in their own beliefs around the addiction or around trauma or whatever it is. Because oftentimes the identified patient goes away and they quickly become the healthiest one in the family system. And that's not an accusation. It shouldn't be like they're healthy and you're not. It's more just, they're starting to look at themselves. And part of it is they're getting treatment, in an environment where they're looking at themselves. So I think if going back to your initial question, like where are they motivated? One of the ways I look at it, like if they've shown up, even if they're kicking and screaming, the patient, there's somewhere in there that they're asking for help.
Yeah.
And I have to look at it like that. And I encourage our teams when I work with teams, to look at it like that. Like there's something in them, spirit, whatever it is, that has them there, because they have a choice. They'll say, I don't have a choice. My family's broken. Everyone has a choice. You could live on the street. You could be in jail. I'm not saying that's always a choice for people, but you could. It's just that choice would be way more uncomfortable than this one. And so I'm just going to be mad about the one that I don't want to do because it's more comfortable for me to be at home and I'd rather be doing that. So I think the families, to be able to organize them around that too, because we can call this a disease, an illness, all that stuff. We can say you wouldn't be yelled at for having cancer, but also, or diabetes, but also people that have cancer and diabetes aren't necessarily like stealing money from their parents' wallets and getting the police called on them and causing financial havoc and all of this stuff. So there is that part that comes along often with the behaviors that come out of addiction, and helping. So helping families. I mean, sometimes families are like, we're done. We're done. We're sending them away. And for those families, I say, well, don't be done now. You finally got them to get some help. Let's not be done now. Let's look at it, right? And then there's other families like, oh, they're there. Everything's great. Well, that's not like, let's explore the feelings that you've had around this. Well, I love them so much. I just want them to get better. I'm not angry at all. Well, I can't imagine that based on what you've experienced when you're telling me the history, you couldn't be angry. So we've got to look at some of these emotions and resentments that they're carrying as well. So if the family can start to heal and the client can start to heal when they come back together, we want to look for the systemic challenges so that we can create systemic solutions for the family system.
Yes. So in the scenario where you said the identified patient is getting better and sometimes the family system doesn't, right? Or that the identified patient could be like taking off, they're doing well, and the family system is left with that void. What are the suggestions then? And even what I would say is also that it's suggestions for what the family system can do in order to be as good as the identified patient, so to speak. But also on the front end, you could potentially, before the addicted loved one gets help, these are also the same things that you could be doing to start and working on yourself that would also help the family system.
I don't want to beat up language because I know I said this and it's kind of how we'll gauge things at times, but I almost don't like to say that the patient's getting better and the family's not, or the family's getting better and the patient's not. Let's look at it like they learn to function in life in a new way while they're in treatment, and the family may be still functioning the same way. Even if that way that they function without that person in it is okay and it works for them, it just, when that person comes back into the family system and they're functioning a different way, and the family's functioning another way, they might not be able to fit and be able to like work as well together or connect in the same way or connect in the way that they want. So I think it's very much like a treatment plan for a patient where you've got to identify their goals. What is it that you want for your life? And it might be short-term goals, can be long-term goals. but then you look at where are you? And then you look at what, if I called you for directions to go somewhere, Chris, and I said, hey, I need to get to California, and you started giving me driving directions from Pennsylvania, right? I'm probably not going to be able to get there using those directions because I'm in South Florida.
Yeah.
So then I tell you I'm in South Florida, and you tell me to give driving directions from South Florida, get on 95, go up, and and I need to get to LA. Well, what you didn't know is I need to get to LA tomorrow. Well, driving there is not going to work, right? I'm going to need to get to and then you say, well, go to the airport, buy a first class ticket, you can get out there. Well, I only have $300, right? So you first need to know where I want to go, and then you need to know where I am. And then we need to know what are the obstacles in the way.
Right.
In this case, are there roads in the way? Is there, is there financial obligation, financial issues in the way? And then you can start kind of making a plan for me to get from Florida to California and help me with that.
Yeah.
It's not much different in the treatment like this, and we look at people individually and say, okay, where, what is it that you want to, and we got to help them with this often. People don't maybe not know, but like, what are the goals that you have? Where are you? And then what are the obstacles in the way so that we can help you begin to travel that territory?
So how about this? It's like an obstacle though, like is that you've had 100 people tell you 100 different sets of directions on how you should go about doing this. And so now you're left feeling, helpless about things. Getting to L seems so impossible.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. An obstacle, when I say it, isn't always like a big challenging thing. It just might be that, there's 3,000 miles in between me and California. That's an obstacle. I've got to travel that territory. So that's the way I'll look at it when building a treatment plan with the patient. I think that's the same for the family. What are your goals? And they'll say, I used to run a lot of family groups for like family workshops, and they would be coming in the families would come in for like a 3 or 4 day workshop with their loved one who was in treatment. And the first day we would do it with just the families. And in the morning we would be just the families and just the therapists, and we'd sit in a circle and we'd do like this simple icebreaker. And there were some questions on it, right? Just your name, where you're from, who you're here for, something you're afraid of, something that you are hopeful for. Simple questions just to get to know each other. There was one question that was, what would you like to get out of this week or this workshop that has nothing to do with Jimmy or Sally who are in treatment? And whether that was a child, or a spouse, it was sometimes there would be such a difficult answer. It would be so difficult for that family member to answer something that they wanted to get out. Some people it was very easy for because they were really mad and we had to work with them on that. But a lot of people, they almost couldn't even say what they wanted without including their loved one in it.
Right.
And I mean, I get that, but we were working with them to say, how can we get you to a place to meet your goals regardless of what everyone else is doing? Because if we go back to that serenity prayer, what I can control is meeting my goals. What I can't control is making sure everybody else meets theirs. But when the family would finally identify that and start meeting those goals that had nothing to do with their loved one in treatment, it started having a lot to do with their loved one in treatment, because now maybe they weren't adding stress to the system or putting additional pressure on them. Because even if they never, when someone is oriented like that, even if they never said like, I need you, Chris, to be happy so that I'm okay. Like, it's like that saying, I'm only as happy as my least happy child. I mean, that is like one of the sickest statements that I think anybody, or my most, I think it's my saddest child. I'm only as happy as my saddest child. Like, of course I'm going to care if my child's happy, but if every time they're in an emotional state and I have to drop down into that, I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. Like, they can at the same time be ecstatic and screaming. And, I would be completely schizophrenic, bipolar, everything all at once,
Yeah.
So once they start kind of meeting their goals, then it helps the whole system. It kind of takes that pressure off. And I'm like, oh, mom's doing fine. Because, if they're oriented like that, oftentimes the patient or client is as well. So I think them understanding what their own goals are, that has nothing to do with their loved one, right? And oftentimes it's around things like, I want to be able to find peace. I want to be able to get into caring for myself. I have some of my own ambitions that I want to follow that have kind of been put on the sideline.
Yeah.
And then the patient is doing theirs. And then we can come up with some family goals, right? So that, they're going to be individuals that are part of a family system. And so how do we identify what are the roles we've been playing and what is that going to be going forward?
Yeah.
For me, I worked with my dad for a long time, and I really enjoyed working with my dad. And our entire relationship, it felt to me like, and I don't know if this was his case, but we did talk about this many years ago when I was getting sober, like it felt like our whole relationship was about work. And I wanted more than that. And I know he did too, and so we changed that. We don't work together. Well, he's not a therapist, but I meant even before that was a commitment. We weren't going to do that, even when it seemed like maybe that would be a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. And we have a great relationship, but it took like kind of re-identifying some of those roles and then also getting to know each other and understanding what the challenges are that each one is having and really laying it on the table, so that we can understand that, we've all contributed to this. And that's, again, not an accusation, but if some people come in, they're not part of a family system or they've been alienated from a long time. But I think where your question is around families that are still like close, at least in maybe proximity or emotional proximity,
right.
And they have a desire to be functioning together.
Right. And how do you help a parent really? Or it is more significant for parents, I think. But, like I'll give you an example of, I probably spoke with the mom, let's say 20, 30 minutes, essentially giving her the components of much of what you just shared and reiterating constantly about it's not a right or a wrong thing. It's a systems thing. It's just this is how things have played out. The system is one that inadvertently supports addiction. And so as soon as we make some shifts in this direction, here's some things you can do, but this is not your fault. This is not on you. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. They just have an addiction. And then the system kind of allows that to continue in a way because you're just unaware of what you're unaware of, right? We don't know what we don't know. And so it's not your fault. And this is the point of all that, to arrive 20 minutes later and I say it's not your fault for the last time. And then she looks at me and says, do you really believe that? Like, how do we, it's not your fault. And seeing the nuance between the system is inadvertently supporting an addiction, and at the same time, you're not responsible and you haven't caused it. It's not on you. It's not your fault. It's nothing that you did or didn't do. Now that you've gained awareness on that what you're dealing here with is an addiction, there are steps we can take in the right direction to both help your loved one as well as what you can do to help yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I might say something that's a little controversial here or push back on that a little bit. Because I think it's also important to acknowledge sometimes there are things that we did and didn't do. I mean, oftentimes we didn't do them. I mean, I'm a parent. If I think it's never my fault is like a tough word to put in there for a lot of people, but I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, sure.
And as parents aren't really parents. They're just kind of older kids that just had kids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think once we're aware of, maybe we were unaware of it, maybe we were, maybe it was just, I've fallen on my face as a dad. It's probably the place where I've fallen on my face the most. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because it's so emotionally charged, and it's not always in a bad way, it's just kind of like and if we can acknowledge those things and understand them, and then also understand that now that I'm aware of, what might impact this now going forward, hey, I got to take some accountability here, just like I'm asking them to take some accountability. Right. What I would say to that mother or about that mother is, I don't know her history. I would put any money on it. I'm not a gambler, but I guess if we went on, what is it, Kalshi, the app that all the kids are betting on, you can bet on anything, which is a whole other podcast. But, that she, in her history, is kind of set to take on responsibility or guilt or shame. And so you having that 20-minute conversation, awareness isn't going to change that underlying belief that she has. It's going to be an opening to help her get there. And she might need to hear you say, yeah, I believe that. But she's not going to believe that right away. Yeah. It's almost, has evidence by her saying, do you really believe that? Because she's not going to. If we could get those people to that, people come to me for different things. I do coaching for executives and other things like that, and work with complex systems. And the joke that I'll give when they say, how, they want it right now is like, well, if I could do it in a day, we're gonna have to charge you a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. And then we'll write a book about it and everybody will want to do it. There's a process to things, and understanding and awareness is a great start, but awareness and $5 is going to get you a cup of coffee maybe not a cup of coffee at Starbucks anymore, but maybe somewhere. So it's a great start. And, the fact that she said that to you, that would be a great opening for a therapist to start exploring with her, like how was she oriented in her family of origin and understanding. When we look at family of origin, just because that's how we're shaped in our families, those are our first relationships with adults or other kids, even if we have siblings, and I've shared this before, but like I remember I was working in China a few years ago. I was doing these leadership workshops, and I was in the airport and I smelled something, and it was like one of the worst. If I had hair in my head, my hair would have stood up. I guess I have some on the back of my neck still. Maybe my beard stood up. I don't even know if I had one then, but it was like this putrid smell. And I looked over and there was this family sitting there with kids, and they were eating, it looked like out of a candy bag, but it was some sort of dried fish out of this candy bag. And it just it smelled like,
wow,
like not good fish, And to me, that was like, and they were just eating it. And the kids were eating it like my kids would eat, potato chips. And it strikes me in environments like that, like taste is shaped, what foods we eat and all by the cultures we're in. Sometimes, a lot of people will adopt those things. Sometimes they rebel against it, but many times they just adopt, and this is how we're gonna, and if taste is shaped that way, or partially shaped that way, behaviors would be too, and we tend to either adopt or rebel against the patterns of our family members. And even if we rebel against them, we're still kind of being controlled by them because we're operating in the opposite way of something that's already there. And then there's this kind of generational weight that gets put on each generation, right? Because there's been the ways that their parents were acting or behaving, and not necessarily in a bad way. It could be the great things that they learned. And then the generation before that and before that. So it would be hard pressed for me to believe that in some way in her family of origin or her family's, either that was thrust upon her in some way, and it would be really beneficial for her to do some work around that. Not that she didn't make any mistakes, because maybe she did, but now you can look at those mistakes and go, hey, I can do better with this, or I can change this. But if there's, even in changing that behavior, if that belief underneath it is still driving it, there's some work to do for her. When people come in for treatment, they're coming in the kind of for behaviors, right? Something's not going right in the way that they're acting in the world. Either they see it, someone else sees it, right? But underneath that is kind of their limiting emotions, we'll call them, and more like the negative emotions. So maybe they're full of fear or shame or guilt. When we can understand what behaviors, those kind of negative limiting behaviors, or what we call negative behaviors, what are there, we can, emotions, the behaviors are almost always in alignment with the emotion. You're full of fear all the time, your behaviors are going to be fear-based.
Yeah.
Just, they are. And so we want to intervene on the behaviors. In this case, it might be the drugs or drinking. And then we want to start understanding the emotions that are driving them, and then raise the capacity for them to be able to experience these difficult emotions. It's not like, it would be great if we said, just don't feel that way anymore. That's just not life. I think as a therapist, we don't put these on the website very often, but we're more teaching people how to feel bad, right? How to build that distress tolerance so that they can experience the worst emotions, the emotions that they might identify the worst, and not then act out in behaviors that are going to hurt them or somebody else, or not move them towards or continue, or just kind of continue the cycle. And then once we can kind of raise that capacity for them to experience those negative emotions, like in this case, for that woman to experience like guilt without then doing the behavior, which might be like hounding her son or enabling him and saying, well, and not challenging him.
Yeah.
Once we can help her experience that then we can start challenging the beliefs that are underneath it. Right. And whatever those beliefs become, it's kind of like in the diagnosis of PTSD, we're often left with these kind of negative fixed beliefs about oneself or the world. So what is her worldview? How does she view herself? How does she view her role? In this case, as a mother, maybe as a spouse, as an employee or employer, and really starting to understand her orientation so we can help her reorient so that that's not like the fixed way in which she sees the world, that like, I'm wrong. That might be the thing that she does. Like, I would imagine this is probably not the only place she experiences guilt. And again, I could be wrong with this because I don't know this woman, but
Yeah.
that would be the type of direction I would want to go, is to understand how is she oriented and shaped in such a way that she can hear an expert say that, she can see it, she can maybe even go to Al-Anon meetings or family and learn about it and still not believe it.
Wow. Yeah. And so, I mean, those are practical suggestions then on what it is that you can do to start to come to a place where you can shift your beliefs around these things. What I'd like to do, like just to clarify or to emphasize this point, is that there might be circumstances where parents were themselves alcoholic, addicted to substances, and so they might have serious guilt and remorse and feel like the definitive impact of their behavior and the way that they live their life and how that impacted their children. And so come to the somewhat reasonable conclusion again that, no, this is my fault. So even if we went all the way to that extreme, what I want to clarify is that my mother was sober. And when I was growing up, what I mean is that my mother never had, because she was sober and she was in a program and she really understood alcoholism and addiction, she never made herself responsible for what happens to my body when alcohol goes in it. You know what I mean?
Good mom.
So that's the recognition that I'm trying to convey. That's the kind of thing that you're not going to be able to necessarily Google, where there's a specific kind of reaction that's happening to me that has nothing to do with anything my mom did or didn't do. Right? And so that's the removal of guilt, so that even if so there's the systemic impact, if you will, to whatever. Like my mother worked, I didn't see her as often, and she was alcoholic, and maybe she could have done some things to further mitigate. But I mean, she really did do a really good job, because she helped me get sober by the time I was 17. So, but you can always look at, you could have done this, you couldn't do that. But I just want to kind of like land on, but the addiction itself, the alcoholism itself, in much the same way that you wouldn't be blaming yourself because your kid had a shrimp allergy, you don't need to do that for alcohol and drugs. But now once you make that recognition, it's like now there are things that you can do to contribute towards recovery rather than...
Well, I think starting with, if like you believe you gave it, like even if they did believe you gave it to them and it was my fault, well, did you start it? Like how did they get it? Right. So you could start challenging it in that way. I'm not saying it's like a direct line like that, but I think there's a story that one of my teachers used to say. She would say, there was twins, and they grew up in this very alcoholic home. Their father drank his whole life. He was miserable. He made it miserable for them, right? And then the boys grew up, and one of them became an alcoholic, lived exactly like his father. The other one never touched a drink. So they interview him, and they say to the boy, the now man who drinks like his dad, he goes, "Why do you drink?" And he says, "Well, you see my father, how could I not drink?" Right? And then they go to the other boy or now man and say, "Well, why don't you drink?" And he goes, "Well, look at my father, how could I drink?" Right? Like, we do have an impact on our children, and it's important to understand that. But there's so much of it we're not in control of. And you're right. Once the alcohol, like for anybody, like I believe that there is a point. I'm not going to say alcoholism is a choice, right? But there is a point where people are choosing. If I were to drink right now, I would, in a way, be choosing to do that. When no one's forcing it down my throat, right? But once it gets in my system, then it's not that I'm not responsible for what happens or I'm not accountable. There's a reaction that then I'm almost at a choiceless point. That's why they say it's not the caboose that kills us, it's the engine, right? You can't, or it's not the first drink, it's not the 10th drink that gets you drunk, it's the first one, right? Those are very simple sayings. They just mean like, I can't get to 10 without one. And if I don't get to one, then I'm not there. And, I've been sober a very long time. So that there's a different kind of choice point in there for me. And I'm not trying to add shame to people who relapse or anything like that. But in looking at it, there is some things that we can do that the kind of compulsion and the action. But I think to your point, for the parents to really understand, if we could get them to that place of not being responsible for what happens in there, but being responsible for their reaction to it, to move them from enabling their addiction to enabling them in recovery, right? Enabling is not a bad word, like a lot of people will say it is. We want to shift that enabling to get them into a recovery program if that's the path they're going down.
So on the topic of choice, how would you explain to parents or to families why did he start drinking again after all of these things that he has gone through, and he promised us he wouldn't, and he said he wasn't going to, and I'd also like you to link that to the term of the built-in forgetter, and how even within the recovery community, you have people who are baffled by the fact that they started drinking again. So everybody's baffled. The addicted person's baffled, the family's baffled, observing it. And so how does that connect to how you would be explaining the idea of choice?
Well, I mean, in the AA literature, it talks about it being cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? It's not cunning, baffling, and powerful because you see it coming. It's cunning, baffling, and powerful because after you're doing it, you're like, oh my God, what did I do? Right? We don't have to look far. I'm not going to be able to note the studies, but we can look at, medication, of any sort of medication, that people will do it. They'll take it until they feel better and then stop taking it.
Yeah.
Whether that's a psychopharmacal or a psychotropic medication or a antibiotic.
Yeah.
Right? People will commit to their New Year's resolution and they're going to lose 20 pounds and they lose 5 and they start and they feel better and then they stop. Right? This is not something that is isolated to an alcoholic or a drug addict, right? People make commitments all the time. I start getting calls every year on like January 25th to February 15th of people who made these really big New Year. This is more in some coaching and stuff I do, they've made these really big New Year's resolutions and now they're not keeping any of them. Right. And so people, I don't think the families have to look too far. I mean, you could ask them, you were asked to go to the therapy to kind of work through this or go to Al-Anon, and did you stay doing it or no? Did you wait until everything seemed okay and you stopped? Or more, if it's an adolescent in the home. I mean, one of the things I love about a lot of what's happening with virtual treatment, especially in the lower levels of care, is, first off, the efficacy is, the studies have shown that it's just as effective. Of course, there's some people that do better in virtual and some people who do better in person, but overall, it's got a consistent efficacy. Is that, when people have been to detox and residential and maybe stayed in care for a long time, they start to get treatment fatigue, right? They're doing better. They're generally feeling better, things look better, but now they're going back to their world. They're going to have work. They're going to be at school if it's a kid that, they're going back to, now the stress is going to come up from being in treatment. The stress is actually coming up. I think they're in a really vulnerable state at that point. Or they go into an outpatient therapy or intensive outpatient and, they really want to be in there for an extended period, want them to be in there an extended period of time to meet the goals that they're at, but then they start getting more work and their families, want more of their time. And then they're like, well, I'm feeling better, so I stop. Or with kids, the parents are, I don't know if you have kids, but
I do,
become
yeah.
You do, or you told me that before. You're an unpaid Uber driver, right? It's a lot to drive kids around. So now if they're in an intensive outpatient program where they're supposed to go to group 3 nights a week for 3 hours a night, and you're taking them there, and then all of a sudden things are a little bit better. It doesn't feel anything like it felt before, and we stop. Mm-hmm. That's why one of the things with virtual treatment that I love is that you can kind of stay with, especially with the kids, because they do a lot of this, they've done a lot of school like that and everything. And it can kind of meet that instead of having a longer commitment every night to drive somewhere and drive home, we can kind of meet them right in their home. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying all this to say, I think most people can identify with starting something, even having the best intentions, and stopping. So why did he pick up after all of this? We have to look at each case. I mean, it's really hard. Congratulations to you to getting sober at 17.
Well, I didn't stay that way. I didn't stay that way the whole time, but I did get sober by 23. I've been sober since then. So it's been 18
even
years.
Even at 23, I mean, I was 32. by then, a lot of the friends that I'd done stuff with at 17, 18, 20, 23, they were kind of had moved on somewhere,
Right.
or they
Right.
just were kind of normal, and now I was able to exist for a long time, kind of not looking like a problem because I was kind of fitting into the
Right.
environments that I was around. They didn't know what I was doing when I went home from those environments, which was continue it while they were like going to bed. But there's so many reasons why they might. I mean, there's so many, like, back when now it's fentanyl, but when it was the Oxycontin, I remember I worked at a place and we had a lot of young men. They were adults, but these 18-year-olds coming in and they've been severely addicted, but they never had a drink.
Mm-hmm.
Never had a drink.
Yeah.
It was easier for them to get oxys than it was for them to get alcohol because they need an ID, right? So
Yeah.
they were sitting there and like, well, I'm never going to be able to drink. And because they go to meetings and everybody says one day at a time, but underneath that, people know that means for the rest of your life. It's like this kind of
Yeah. The catch-22. Yeah. Yeah. One of the
So,
paradoxes.
what am I going to, I don't even know if this kid really fit. He had a dependence because he was using a substance. And I don't know if he fits the traditional thing of an alcoholic or drug addict, but he probably shouldn't, we work with, probably shouldn't drink right now while that's around, because if you take a drink, it's going to lower your inhibitions and then you might easily go to it. But think of there's so much, especially with drinking and now marijuana, it's just everywhere. It's in our culture, and I'm not trying to vilify it, but it's everywhere. And there's pressures to do that stuff and people want to feel good. And I think, that I don't know how old you are, but you probably remember this is your brain on drugs.
Yep.
It was the frying pan, and they'd take an egg, and they'd say, this is the brain. And then they'd crack it in the frying pan and it would start frying and say, this is your brain on drugs.
Yep.
That's probably one of the worst things they could have ever put out there, because drugs don't feel that way.
Right.
The first time people do them.
Yeah.
You don't go to a meeting and hear someone go, I did drugs, and or I drank. And so when you hear people go, I drank and I felt amazing.
Right.
Now, if you keep doing it, that ultimately will happen. But, they start feeling better. They back to this kid, they start, then there's pressures to do things. They want to be normal. But that's where in the steps, I believe that's where the unmanageability comes in, that the unmanageability isn't so much, at least how I was taught, and there could be different perspectives, wasn't so much around like the life, like my life circumstances and finances and all of that being unmanageable. That could be a component of it, but it's that relationship that I think it's unmanageable, that I think with all of this evidence that I have that drinking is not good for me, that I'll return to it.
Right.
And in the AA literature, it even talks about, I'm not going to quote it exactly right, but it said something about like, we will forget the pain of even a week or a month ago,
A month ago, right.
Again, I don't think that's something that is only for alcoholics or drug addicts. I think people in general do that.
Right.
You do it in relationships, do it at work, do it at, I think people aren't, I believe that people who suffer from alcohol and drug addiction are often the lucky ones. Thoreau said that most of humanity lives lives of quiet desperation. And I meet so many people that I work with a lot of people that don't have drug or alcohol issues, or even other addictive issues like that would require, that's kind of burning their lives down. And I meet a lot of people who are silently suffering. And again, that's not everybody on the planet, but things are okay. As they get older, especially, after their 30s into their 40s and 50s, and realize that, they're kind of living in mediocrity and not chasing the goals that they had as a younger person, and start to settle for things. For someone who is suffering from addiction, that desperation often gets turned up. Like, I need to do something or I'm going to die. Most people are like, I can't stand my job, but it's okay because it pays the bills. You're not thinking like, I'm going to die. And I'm not suggesting that's, you should go to drugs and alcohol in order to burn it down so you can build it up.
Yeah.
But I think
I don't think that you could. I don't think that most people would, unless they had a dependence, like you were mentioning before, as far as fentanyl and like high-powered substances or behaviors. But the people that I know that like would maybe fit the bill of like living lives of quiet desperation. And if we were to say heroin or alcohol or cocaine or crystal meth or anything like that is like level 10 as far as the stuff that they can get into, like they don't get past the 7 with whatever it is
Right.
they do. And so they never have that desperation to like have to change.
And, you know, they will, sometimes people get into other sorts of pain and suffering that will have them do that. But the point is, you don't have to wait till then. You know, I mean, that's like
Right.
when you look even at the, you know, I think not AA is not for everybody, and the 12 steps aren't for everybody, but they are very powerful and argued to be evidence-based with some studies that have happened. But, you know, just looking at the history of that, I mean, before AA, other than some religious-based, you know, kind of organizations, and it was not, I mean, it was like, you were going to just keep going till you died, end up in jail or have a lobotomy, you know, or be locked up. You know, it was not, alcoholism was not treated, you know, it was either lived with or you were just kind of out. And so even when that started though, the people that came in, when you look at the history, were very, it was like the anonymous part of it. I mean, they were very low bottom, like people that their lives were really falling apart. And then over time, they would even start looking, other people got word of it, and there were people from the history that show that there was like people looking down on somebody, and you hear that I spilled more than you drank. Well, so what? But then even in the literature, it talks about they started seeing people come in that still had 2 cars in the garage and still had their families together, and they didn't have to burn everything down. And I think that we're living in a time where, I was talking to our son about this the other day, 17. You know, and I said, you know, Josh, I don't really envy being a teenager right now. Just from the fact that everything's recorded. Like, could you imagine? Like, for me, we would have to take pictures, have them developed, get them back from the drugstore, and then mail them to 1,000 people and see if they sent back a note saying whether they liked it or not. You know, I mean, it's like nobody did that. But he actually said, yeah, it's pretty complex. And I just started to think, like, the easier it gets to survive, the more complex it gets to live. Like, people will say, well, this generation's late. Well, they don't have to struggle for anything. I don't have to struggle for much. You don't have to struggle for much. We have to make ourselves do that. You know, I mean, and
meaning like introduce struggle.
Yeah. I mean, the struggle was part of us. Physical struggle was part of our lives for many years. You'd walk and carry stuff and move around, and you had to get up when the sun came up and tend to the farm, and then there wasn't a lot of time for kind of anxiety, right? There wasn't a lot of energy for it either. And I'm not saying people didn't have challenges or anything like that, but now it's just kind of like, you got to force yourself to, because as Michael Easter points out in his books, The Comfort Crisis and Scarcity, right? Like we're kind of, while we're built to do hard things, we're programmed to do the next easiest thing. Because when you had to like, if you were living in an Arctic tundra 200 years ago, and you had to use all of your energy to go hunt and come back, you wouldn't go for a run or lift weights. Also, you needed to eat as much as possible when it was in front of you, and you needed to, and now you needed to rest as much as possible when it was available. And that's kind of how we're built and programmed. At least I believe that. And so we don't have to hunt and gather anymore. You just press a few buttons on your phone and groceries show up. And so,
and then
like, what do they do with that energy and all of our stuff? It's challenging, and that sets up a whole thing of like, who am I in the world, and what am I doing? And, I think we probably need to examine the age of adulthood. I mean, we've probably increased at least in healthier, more modern first world countries, and there can be an argument to this too, and maybe it's changing, but lifespan has increased significantly in the last 150 years. And we figure that in. I know the average is going to kind of come out of like infant mortality rate and people that died early because of illnesses. It's only been 75 years since we had antibiotics, right? You die of a tooth, gum disease or something. So what we haven't done in that time is really expanded that, at 18, you're an adult. People would go work and then they'd stay working at the same place forever and then they'd stop. Now people change careers a bunch of times. I mean, you see this if you're in the rooms where you see people go back and go finish high school and college and all that stuff in their 40s. Like we can live a whole nother, it used to be like a first act, second act, third act. I think there's a whole other few acts in there. And I'm not saying that means they stay home and do all this kind of stuff, but like, we don't need to push people into like, now you got to go to college or get right into work, or, maybe you need to work, but do something, there's different ways to kind of examine. And there's a lot of pressures on people becoming adults and not really knowing how to function in the world. And that creates a level of stress as well. I kind of got off topic there, but I think that's important for families to consider as well.
Has there, like in your experience, going back to when you first started as in addiction treatment counseling and where you are now, the challenges that a 20-year-old faced when you first started compared to now?
Yeah, I think somewhat. I think we often look at challenges as being something hard. I think sometimes the challenges are of things just coming easy to us. Like I think the things that come just easy to us without having to work can often destroy us. I mean, you used to see that a lot. You see a lot with things like gambling and stuff like that. But I mean, I just like the ability to, now we don't even have to learn. You just type it into AI. You got to check it though. I think a lot of people don't check it because if you let it go long enough, it sometimes doesn't start sounding like as intelligent. But then that's expanding, and life is going to change. I don't know. I don't think anybody that tells you they know how it is. I don't know, but it is. The jobs are going to be different, and everything. But this might be a bigger leap, but I don't know if it was as big a leap as going from horsepower to having a car.
I think it might be.
Maybe
I think it might be
bigger.
Yeah.
But I think, there are some things that are challenging with like the availability of, when I started, there was no social media. The iPhone, I think it just come out, or maybe it was just coming out. And that's all led to just availability. The drug laws, the marijuana laws were different. You can get synthetic stuff at any grocery gas station you want for it. Turns out synthetic type of heroin, that stuff is, the potency of marijuana, it's not the same as, and we're seeing really adverse effects from some of that. And I'm not saying THC is evil, but it's not in the amounts that people are. I mean, vaping wasn't available. Vaping has increased you don't have to roll a joint and walk behind a stadium anymore. The frequency of use and the potency is much stronger, which can lead to some acute challenges for folks. And that also is the parents using it. It's just, and it's not just marijuana. Kids can get on, I'm not trying to advertise this, but they can get on Snapchat and basically have anything they want delivered to them. Anything.
Right.
If you're a parent and you think that's not true, it's 100% true. You can eat just as easily get fentanyl pills or MDMA or marijuana as you can get a chicken sandwich.
Yeah, and that's like a dire warning, but it's not an over exaggeration by any means. And it's something that, we need to be aware.
I think the potency of the fentanyl and where we're finding it, I've heard another young man who passed away recently from smoking marijuana, wasn't doing anything else, was in the marijuana and died. That wasn't as prevalent. We'd have to go somewhere, like effort to go somewhere and where there was heroin and get it. And again, it can be delivered and it's in all kinds of things. And kids that think they're doing like a tramadol, which is like a very mild painkiller that I probably wouldn't have ever taken. I wanted something stronger, but they're pressed fentanyl pills. I mean, it's terrifying. I mean, I gave a teenager an Narcan to carry in his car just for people that might, if he sees some of his friends that are smoking weed and something happens. I mean, they don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in those terms, there's some challenges like that. I think there's, just some different pressures with, what they're seeing in the world and who they, it looks like if you go on any sort of, and I don't think social media is either, but you go on anything like that and it looks like it's just very easy to do nothing and become very wealthy. And there are people that do that, but that's still not the norm, and you're looking at people's outsides through filters and not their insides. And, I don't think social media's problem is only with the kids, right? I mean, how many parents are looking at it and not paying attention and focusing there? I mean, our attentions have been hijacked for sure. Not only the kids, the adults as well. And I think that's for families that want to heal with their kids, I think they got to challenge themselves, not just on that, but on other things.
Yeah, it seems like the tone and tenor of this conversation is similar to so many conversations that I hear across so many other podcasts, as well as my own. That probably if I go back the last 10 podcast episodes, there hasn't been some mention of fentanyl and just how scary it is today comparatively to in the past, and how it doesn't feel alarmist the way that alarmism even felt in the past, right? Where you could be alarmist about the TV set. You could be alarmist about, being online at all when that initially came out. You could be alarmist in all these different ways, but it feels like here we are, time of this recording, 2025. It's not alarmist anymore. It's like it's warranted. It's there. And it feels like everyone is having that kind of conversation. And it makes me feel like, well, what am I doing? I mean, just hug your kids, man. Just hug your kids, stay close, keep them close, and do, everything you can to just kind of build that connection as much as you can for what might be coming. Because one of the things that you said also is like, or you alluded to it, or maybe I interpreted it as like the luxury of anxiety or something. Like in the past, it was like, we don't have time to sit here and be anxious. We don't have time to sit here and be depressed. We got to get up and go. We got to do things
because we didn't have the reminders to be anxious, right? So basically, every kid's carrying a GPS with them now, and if parents have it active, they can get a reminder of when they're get a notification if they're speeding. You get a notification if they're somewhere that they weren't supposed to go. You get a notification if they spend money on something. I'm not saying that stuff's bad. I mean, it can be helpful, but like when I was a kid, and it's easy to say when I was a kid and go back, and because we're not going back. This is if anybody thinks we're going back, we're not going back. And those times had their own challenges as well, and the times before that had their own challenges as well. But there wasn't like this. Okay, my kid's 15 minutes late. Where are they? Or they're on time, but they're speeding, and I got to check and see where they are. Or I bought this when our daughter was born. I bought this device. I like to do the fitness apps and stuff like that. And there was this one for kids, and it was like a sock they put on and to measure her heart rate and heart rate variability and all this oxygen levels and all this stuff in her sleep. And
yeah, I
was like, man, I'm such a cool dad. I'm really into this stuff. You could ask my wife, I never return anything. I get lazy, but I returned this thing because like it went from I could get the data, but what I didn't realize is there was an app on my phone, and if she kicked the sock off, I thought she was dying. If there was something wrong with the Bluetooth or where the Wi-Fi was connected, I'd get a note, and I'm sprinting into the room where her crib is, expecting to see her blue in the crib, and she's just kicked the sock off and laughing. And I was like, what am I doing? I don't need this information. Yeah. And then so there's a balance there of like, and I'm not saying those people who are doing that's wrong. For me, that I wasn't able to like, or maybe I didn't put the effort in. And I was just like, maybe this isn't as important. But like this, Yuval Noah Harari talked about this, about AI actually in one of his books like many years ago. And he was talking about, this is a little bit different topic, but he was talking about the power of AI. And again, this is 8-10 years ago. And he said, one day everybody will have an AI doctor, and that'll be great. Maybe there'll even be things that we can put in our blood to kind of track everything, and you can have real-time stats. But his point was it could be great, and there could be great benefits to it. What I took of this is you could also always be sick, right? Because your levels are never they're going to fluctuate. They're never going to be exact. There's always something to improve, and you're aware of it all the time. So that can bring up anxiety. And so but I think when we look at this more from a spiritual perspective, it's not about eliminating all of that stuff. Right? It's about kind of relaxing back from it and understanding like we're getting more information than we've ever gotten by far, and it increases every single day. And like, how can we relax back from that and choose what we're going to look at, choose what we're going to, rather than just reacting to every thought or every piece of information that comes through. And unfortunately, we're swimming upstream a little bit because some of these things are designed to catch our attention like that, to buy stuff and have stuff show up. I remember I used to like, how excited, I don't know about you, but if a package came to our house, I was so excited. They didn't come that often.
Yeah.
Now I got I got to spend half the time like flattening boxes to put out because everything comes in a box, and Amazon dropped stuff off.
Yeah.
And hey, it's also great. There's great parts of it, but like what part of it am I attached to in a way that it's like giving away my ability to garner control of my own life and of my own thoughts and actions?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's swimming upstream so much as like taking a fire hose to the
Yeah, that's
face.
probably a better analogy.
It's tough. I mean, I'm, concerned, like I'm concerned for, I feel like there's a point of, there's going to be two types of people, kind of. That there's going to be people that are just going to like entirely go with the force of that flow, and they're just going to lose themselves in this environment that's so geared towards addiction. And then there's going to be people who are craving and then head for more connection and in person and are kind of beginning to opt out entirely from some of that. Like they're getting out of the river.
I'm
We're done.
And I don't know that's any different than it's always been. It might just be more intense now. I mean, there's people that
Yeah, the intensity
intent.
is the
And-
difference.
And I'm a bit of an optimist. I think with a lot of the stuff like in this like massive transformation and how we communicate and everything like that, and it's like very clunky still in some ways. And I'm not a technologist by any means, but I feel like the human spirit really longs for that connection. And listen, connection, being able to connect over the phone, have the ability to, like you and I can be in two different states and have this. I'm having a meeting tonight with some friends of mine in Australia, right? I've been able to reach out and talk to people that I never would get a chance to reach out and talk to otherwise, right? It's great. But like, I think it comes back to what the question that we ask around even addiction is, do you have it or does it have you? Is it a tool that you can use? And, actually hopeful for, I'm like, I've got an older kid and younger kids, and they growing up with this stuff may be able to manage it much differently than others do. I don't know. It'd be nice to look back in history and see some of the other big advances that happened and how it kind of settled over generations. I don't know. Maybe my narrative around like AI is not like everybody else's. I feel like if we have this technology that's going to be very smart, like why would it ruin everything? Like why wouldn't it find ways to solve all the problems? So that might, without it being like some sort of post-apocalyptic adventure, that doesn't make a great movie, but I think that maybe there's a chance that a lot of this helps us with because there's still this component of the human spirit that is powerful and can do things that I don't know that anything else can.
Yeah. And connection with the human spirit is definitely where the solution lies,
Right.
I
So
think.
we go back to Carl Jung saying that he basically needed a spiritual upheaval. He just didn't know how to create it in somebody. And and Dr. Sokor said a psychic change, which was a rearrange. He went on to describe it, at least how I interpret it, as a rearrangement of our ideas, attitudes, and emotions. It wasn't going to find something we didn't have. It was rearranging what we already did.
Rearranging what we already
What
did.
we already have. I mean, I really believe that. I believe that we're kind of born into this world with this innocence, and that gets kind of covered up, and over time, we start seeing some realities of life or what we believe are. We get wounded. We get, some people it happens earlier than others. But I could talk to my son and who's 3 and say, "What do you want to do? What do you want to do?" He goes, "I want to go get a blue dog and name him Kuko. Like, I want to be Spider-Man. I want to be a superhero." Like he, when he's 25, he might not be saying that. I don't know. Maybe if I do a really good job, don't mess it up like we talked about before, he'll still be doing that. But we lose some of that creative spirit and stuff. And I think a lot of the work is returning to that. I think recovery or spirituality is not is a process of returning to the spirit that we are, not going to find something we don't have. I think that's what addiction is. I'm trying to fill this void with something that is outside of me.
Right. And what do you think about the void itself? Do you think the void is a matter of perspective or perception? Is it a delusion or is it real?
Well, I mean, we get into a discussion of what's real and maybe everything's a delusion, but I mean, I think it's going to be different for each person. And I think most of the time it's not real. I mean, we don't see reality. We see our interpretation of what is. And we know that because you and I can experience the same thing. And even if we've got similar histories or we've been in the same place, you're going to see it one way and I'm going to see it another. I mean, and so I think there's this great prayer I like. It's a Hindi prayer called the Asatoma prayer. One of the translations is, let this practice move us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, and from time-bound consciousness to the timeless state of being that we are. That everything I see is kind of unreal. It's all colored by my history. And I'm not going to get rid of that. Some of that's great because I can use my history as an asset to, I can use wisdom. My history is a great asset if I use it like that. If I let it use me unconsciously and automatically, it's not, because I'm going to apply this lens to things that the lens doesn't need to be applied to, and to move us from that darkness to light. I'm myopic, especially under stress, and there's the whole part is dark outside of what I see. And to be able to kind of broaden that perspective, moving from this timeless state of, time-bound consciousness, which is I'm focused on what's happening now, what happened in the past, what happened in the future, when really all we have right now is this moment. And it might sound like a bumper sticker, but it's absolutely true. And was writing about this the other day, what is peace? And I think peace is that I have my past and I can use it. I can use the information. I can think about the future. I can plan for it. But I don't have to let those things drive me in this moment. And a lot of what recovery principles are, at least for me, is recognizing when I'm out of that peace sooner and returning to it quicker. And when I can really do that, and this seems like a lofty goal, but I think there's times where you can really do it. Feels like we're timeless. There's not this urgency to solve everything, to get everything done in this moment, to fix the past and plan for the future. It's I'm just right here. We don't live anywhere but right here. By the way, we don't live anywhere but the present. It's where's our orientation. At least that's what I believe.
So in closing, is there anything that you would say one or two or three even suggestions, but if you can narrow it down to one, what would you say is the most important thing to focus on for families that are navigating having an addicted loved one? That would be helpful to them in a practical sort of way, something they would really benefit from if you were to narrow it down.
I think really getting some help understanding they're going to see the problem the way that they see the problem. And they may be very close to what's happening. But getting, like I said, you can't grade your own paper. I wasn't qualified to grade my own paper. To take that tact and get some help to understand not only what's going on with their loved one, but really look at the whole family system and get to know we have a saying for therapists, counselor, know thyself, that I've got to know what are my own areas that trigger me or that I get countertransference in with clients or, populations that I can't work with, or, what my stress levels are when I'm going into a session, or on a daily basis. And I think that can translate greatly for families. Family, know thyself, or, mom, know thyself, dad, know thyself. Allow yourselves to be challenged in this, not because it's your fault, but because you want to grow. You might see their path to getting, you might be defining in one way, getting better or healing very different than they would. And being able to get some guidance to not only understand that, but then pick your battles.
Yeah. And I wonder if what you said before kind of extends to families also, where you said, I think in some ways people with addictions are the lucky ones, right? In the sense of if they have the opportunity to recover from them, right? Well, does that extend to the family, you think? That if you're identifying that your loved one has an addiction and then what you may go through in order to recover from that experience, that you would get exponential benefits from it.
I often will see families that seem like they're very addicted to that loved one, like I said earlier. And so I think it can be very similar. Not that you actually are addicted to them. I'm not saying that. I said it can seem like that, but I think, you can be the lucky one for your families. Where hope is a powerful tool. It's not a strategy. You can't just hope something into existence, but to be able to see what can happen for families, what can happen for individuals. And you could be the lucky ones. Your family could be extremely lucky in that way. It doesn't feel like it in the middle of it, but what's on the other side.
Right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. You are someone who helps people on the front lines, that you are the person who the people who are struggling with the addictions come to receive help. So how do families connect with you?
You can go to my website, ryansoave.com. You can follow me on Instagram, just at ryan.suave. I'll put stuff out there. I'm starting to put some more videos out there and some courses, and got a book I'm working on. So hopefully,
Great.
pray that I can actually follow through. But yeah, they can find me that way. They can book a consultation on there or just get some information as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.